Welcome to Black Hat Windows Security Conference 2002, held February 7th through the 9th in New Orleans, Louisiana. The following videotape was recorded live at the conference and produced by the Sound of Knowledge Incorporated.
My name is JD Glaser. I'm the Director of Engineering for the Foundstone Security Company. And I also usually have a partner, Samil Shah. He's not going to be with us here today, so today you get me. I took a shower today. I don't smell too bad. You don't have to sit like all that far back. I have some slides that probably have some pretty small text, so you're stubborn, I'm sure I'll sit in the back. Any Patriots fans here today? Excellent. Everybody else, get out. Okay, today we're going to talk a little bit about web hacking, kind of the state or futility of firewalls on the web. Last year everyone was complaining because they had too many things to secure, and this year your nightmare is worse. So you now have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, at least on a small web farm, for almost each application, you may have, 5 to 6 points of defense that you normally didn't have to worry about before. These things weren't, well, they've been growing in prevalence, but no one's really been paying attention to them until this year. This year is really kind of the year of the web app hack. Some of the traditional limitations of network hacking, since we've been doing it for a while, our network defenses have been getting better. So we do have, in a lot of cases, more robust, more secure defenses against traditional attacks. Firewalls are very common. People understand them now. There's a lot of good companies that make good GUIs. The overall training of firewalls is much more prevalent these days than it used to be a couple years ago. OS vendors are, slowly but surely they are learning, and patches are coming out more rapidly. And there is increased maturity in coding practices. We're definitely a long way from being perfect. We still have a lot of buffer overflows and things. But if you consider the amount of code that's out now versus the amount of exploits, even though there's more exploits, I think in proportion, things are slightly better. As an example of firewall defenses against old traditional attacks, you can see installing a firewall kind of knocks out the last 2 or 3 years of concerns of exploits. However, we now have a new danger that firewalls just don't defend against, at least at this state. This is pretty much a situation as we have today. You take any standard web farm. And you may have a firewall in front of it, but you do have one hole going through your firewall that allows bidirectional traffic coming in and out. And behind that, you have 3 layers of applications, and each one of those layers is vulnerable. And your firewall is not going to really do anything to stop that. In a traditional hacking method, one of the things that, like last year, one of our biggest techniques for penetration testing was we set up a lot of netcat listeners and redirectors, and we depended a lot on, taking over a box, setting those up, and then establishing outbound connections. Probably only 1% of all firewalls out there, had an administrator that would actually take the time to lock down outbound access. So setting up a remote shell and shoveling a shell back to us via an outbound connection was a really successful technique for us. People are starting to catch on, and probably maybe 10% now of firewalls actually block outbound access. However, with web hacking, we don't even need that anymore. That's almost an obsolete technique. I'll talk a bit more about that later. Probably the biggest point on this slide is this one right here. HTTP traffic is perceived as friendly traffic. If you go to your network, you lock it down, you set up your firewalls, you set up your ACLs, and let's say you do a really good job of actually locking down your network. You probably do have port 80 open somewhere because your company has some type of web server, whether it's an information server or some way to get in. And if you were to ask pretty much anyone in your company, HTTP traffic is really perceived as friendly traffic. What harm could occur over HTTP? Fine, open up the hole, let it in, we're locked down. We'll set up an HTTPS server and we're good. Also, since this is a relatively new kind of area, content application-based attacks are still really perceived as rare. When you think of hacking, you usually think of something else. Telnet buffer overflow exploit, something that comes to mind. But not really, hacking up your web farm. Also, web hacking is really fairly simple. A web browser and an internet connection can actually grab you, quite a bit of all the information that you need to get into a network. So here's one kind of attack that web servers or firewalls can't really prevent. The first part is, your firewall isn't really a stateful application monitor unless you're, turning it into an application level, gateway and monitoring all your packets for specific things. It's not going to stop URL interpretation attacks. The second thing is your firewall isn't going to stop input validation attacks. And it's also not going to stop from SQL poisoning. So all three of these things we're actually going to go over today and talk about. Each one of these is pretty much deadly or devastating to your network in its own right. And if you take the three of them and put them together, it's a really powerful combination. And just considering, again, how many points you have to defend against and how many things that you don't have control over. Usually as a, if you're a network administrator, you have control over your firewall. Very few, network administrators have, control over all this, unless you're going to, sit down with soft dice and, review your web server, review your all your web applications, go over your database. Most companies have different database administrators versus your firewall administrators. In many companies, those two people don't communicate very much. It's a lot of points to cover. It's a lot of communication to talk about. And considering the size of some companies, that's a huge hurdle just communication-wise to overcome. We also have reverse engineering HTTP cookies. This is probably my favorite diagram. I'm kind of a visual learner, so hopefully you'll dig it. What this does is this shows a basic URL going in, trying to get some normal customer data. The points to really understand are that each part of the URL actually targets a specific layer of your web farm or your e-commerce farm. You have this part that can be used to attack your web server. You have your CGI section that can be used to attack any of your web applications, and then you actually have data that will most likely get passed back to your database server and be used to attack your database server. Now, probably the new part is that all of this information and all of this potential for attack goes through one hole. It used to be in traditional hacking, you used to have multiple holes. Telnet listened on one port, FTP was on another port, and firewalls were very good for kind of helping to lock down certain of those applications. Now that you have things like people are standardizing on XML, people are standardizing on SOAP, this is really becoming the way for all communication. If you start piping all of your protocols and all of your communication down one pipeline, that's a lot of state information to examine. These are the main type of effects on web hacks. Information source disclosure, passwords, path information can be very important. Path information can tell you a lot of things, how it was set up, how to, if you have a script, if you know the path, then you're probably going to need to modify your script, whereas it would normally fail. Now you know the correct path information, alter your script, and now it will work. And many times you'll see either the, possibly the potential password for the box itself, or in many cases, the most common password you'll find is the password to your database server. In many cases, CGI scripts or ASP scripts or JSP scripts have to go get data from the database. So the most common thing is they just kind of keep the password there locally. They assume that since that is parsed on the server end and the answer is never sent back to the client, then no one's ever going to find it. But there's been several, at least like 15 I can think of, web vulnerability source disclosures, so you can just grab that information. Also, just tricking a database to disclose more information than is originally intended. And then we have everybody's favorite arbitrary command execution. They didn't give us any water. Yeah, if you could, that would really be great. Thank you very much. Okay, a couple things that would probably help you out for going through and checking out a potential target. Port scanner, Netcat is the simplest, most wonderful tool in the world. Who here doesn't know about Netcat? Excellent. Sometimes a vulnerability checker is very helpful, but not necessary. Whisker's a good one. There's a couple new ones out. Dave Litchfield's working on a couple new ones that are pretty nice. And also probably the latest addition is an open SSL tool, basically taking Netcat, piping it through an SSL stuff, and then just taking all the information that we're going to talk about today and piping it right through HTTPS and see that it doesn't stop us at all. If you were to ask your higher level management about these questions, a common high-level myth is how secure SSL or cryptography makes you. The only thing that SSL does for you is keeps people from eavesdropping on you, but it doesn't do anything to prevent someone from hacking your network. Actually, if someone hacks you through HTTPS or SSL, really all they've done is you've actually kind of helped them because they can just bypass all of your IDS and you can no longer monitor their traffic patterns. If you have two web farms set up on HTTP and HTTPS, if the attack comes in on port 80, you can, if you're logging stuff, you can see the whole attack replayed. However, they can come in and do the same damage through HTTPS. However, you're not going to be able to capture anything. This is a really common misconception in the industry. We have very, very expensive digital certificates signed by VeriSign. And it is useful, and it's worth your money to have that, but you just have to realize what it is you're protecting. You're protecting data in transit. It's not a defense for your network. Here's a little bit of an example of what I was talking about. Probably last year it was pretty common to just use Netcat and just start attacking your web server directly. But now we just take our web client and our attacks and we just pipe them through Netcat, and Netcat in turn pipes it through an open SSL tunnel, and we're just communicating with the web server exactly as we were before. We now just have an encrypted hack versus a clear text hack. So here's probably like one of the most common with Microsoft ones, the global.asa file. And that's a pretty standard, recommended get rid of. Most security documents, make that pretty clear. Microsoft is just riffed with, tons of default applications that it installs, and you probably spend the majority of your time trying to get rid of all those things. However, to Microsoft's defense, one of the things that's made them great is that they're so developer-friendly. And really one of the ways that they get developers intrigued is they just make it really easy for them to understand the technology. So they put this stuff out there, they start playing with it, and a lot of cool web applications start appearing. The only problem is that those samples usually have a great deal of security holes in them. I really love this example because it highlights the difference between Microsoft and Unix users. I'm willing to bet that if you're an NT user you'll look at the URLs in this and probably not understand the difference. However, if you're a Unix user, you'll probably spot the difference like right off the bat. And the difference is the lowercase JSP and the uppercase JSP in this. One of these works correctly, sends you the page. The other one does not get parsed correctly and sends you the source code. In this case, we would probably have some database information down here, or something to log into the ODBC driver. The difference is that Microsoft is not case sensitive on things. So, and where Unix is case sensitive on things. So Unix users are very, very trained to be on the lookout and type correctly. Windows users can type in anything they want and it'll just work. So it really comes down to kind of affecting quality testing. It's very hard to test for all these variables if you just kind of allow them. Here's another small example. This one's been out there for a while, the HTR exploit, and just using that to reveal source. SQL query poisoning is really starting to come into its own. I think the term was probably coined like about 6 months ago, at least kind of the first time I ever heard it. But really, SQL query poisoning is attempting to trick SQL Server into returning more information than you're originally requesting or what it thinks that you need. What did I want to point out here? Okay. Basically, usually, in a normal query, you would just have ID equals to 3. So if you're like logged in as a customer and you're wanting to look at a particular piece of information that's coming from your database, your ID would just equal 3. This plus or plus 1 equals 1 wouldn't even be there. However, by adding this, and you just get one record returned. And this is only true if that 1 happens to be there. But by adding this or, 1 equals 1, that is always true. So essentially what that does is it pretty much tricks you into returning all the records. And there really isn't much in the way of SQL query to stop that. If anyone's really interested in learning defense for this, Chip Andrews from SQLsecurity.com is giving a talk later, and you should go check that out. A couple years ago, probably like in 1995, 1996, the big fear was a Unix hack and, RM-RF, where you just get your hard drive wiped. In my mind, an RM, a remote RM command is not as nasty as drop table. And to me, the reason is usually, even if your hard drive gets wiped, usually you have a backup tape and you can get it restored. Usually you have backup tapes of your data tables too, but at least the one I find not quite as often. Usually the data in your database is also much more dynamic, and usually you stand a chance of losing a lot more data if someone drops the tables in your database than you would normally lose if someone wiped your files and restored them from a backup tape. At least in the field, that's just kind of what I've seen to be true. So this is particularly nasty, and not many people are aware of it. To highlight the difference, here is if I was sitting at a SQL tool, this is the command that I would type. But if I was going to come in over the web and do that, I can do this query, just as if I was sitting as administrator, via a URL, and this is the syntax for it. So notice how this really nasty execution is taking place in our URL. If you kind of go back to this, here we've used our little missile to kind of get past this first part, and then we've appended something incredibly destructive here at the end. Here we have, remote command execution, everybody's favorite. One of the reasons that we're able to get remote command execution is because of a stored procedure on SQL Server called XP_command shell, which is just a stored procedure query that's there by default. You would have to actually go physically remove it if you didn't want it to be available, but that will take actual command line commands and execute them. So what we're going to do, here's the actual URL syntax. We're going to call our CGI script, get past there, OK, and then we're going to send this part to the database. And this is, if you were sitting at a command prompt, this is what would happen. We're actually going to copy cmd.exe. Go ahead.
Yeah, a couple questions about that. %01, the dot, and you have forward reverse quotes. Is that just forward reverse quotes as Microsoft?
What are you talking about this?
No, well, it's in this one. No, go to where you were. The store procedure call execution.
Yeah.
Okay, so you got I equals 3, %01. So wondering about %01. Wondering about dot, and then of course, are the quotes supposed to be like that, or is that just color?
To tell you the truth, I don't know. It just works. That's a good question for Chip, actually. Go ahead.
What do you see in the field as far as people restricting the users on their database that are used on the website? Because I know, isn't it just SAs that can run like extended procedures like XP's command shell?
Most, I see very, very few SQL servers that are set up with appropriate user permissions. Most SQL servers are just set up with SA wide open. And if you look at a lot of like Samuel has a great little talk on this because it's one of his personal pet peeves. Cutting and pasting, like a lot of the samples come with just, like logging in SA blank password. Probably the same way that the internet worm cruises as fast as it does is, blank passwords. So there's a vast amount of servers that are there just, SA blank password. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? Okay, so what this does, if we were able to, sit this down and execute this command at a prompt, now that we have cmd.exe in our web server executable scripts directory, now we can start to do interesting stuff with the web server. All right, I'm going to show you guys a demo, hopefully kind of wrap up some of these things I'm talking about. And here's a couple assumptions that we're going to make. Currently with what's kind of recommended, what's currently known, if you take your network and you lock it down as hard as you can, you set up your firewall, all ports are blocked off, the only thing you're allowing is HTTP traffic. You've turned off all outbound traffic from your network, so your firewall will detect that someone's trying to open up a telnet port from your web server going out and shut it down. And so overall, you've got very good security. No one can really come to you and say you've done a bad job. It would actually look pretty good. So what we're going to illustrate is that an incredibly small opening can be a very huge opening. Basically, all we need is just one entry point, just the HTTP hole going in. And there's several ways to achieve this. Probably the most popular is the IIS Unicode bug. The double decode bug, buffer overflows, and finally SQL poisoning. All right, what I want to show first is just going to a web server. got the default page. Okay, we'll get something interesting. Okay, now we want to execute some commands. So we're going to execute a command via the Unicode bug. And you can see that in the URL up here for those who aren't familiar with the Unicode bug. That's really the part that, well, let me back up for 1 second. We know that the web server will execute code in the executable scripts directory, so we want to try something first, and we see that that fails. So now we think, let's say we're trying something, let's try to break out of our little prison and execute something. Hey, that looks pretty good to me. So we'll give that a shot. Well, the IIS parser stack is actually doing a pretty good job of detecting that you're trying to break out of the little prison, and it's stopping you. But what they forgot to do was check for a Unicode breakout, essentially. So it's actually going to trick the parser and allow you to back out of the scripts directory, put you into the Windows System 32 directory, and then execute something that you wouldn't normally be able to execute. And as you can see, this web server is 10.1.1.50, and here we snagged the address, so we can see that we're running the command on that box. So if I come over here for a moment, we can see that there's currently nothing in my scripts directory to execute. So what I want to do is I want to get some code over there because I want to do something. While this may be executing, I'm only executing this command as the user, or the iWeb user, and it's not very powerful. It doesn't tell me much about what I want to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this script I made. Actually, Sawmill made this. And that doesn't quite fit on there, does it? All right, there's kind of the end of it. It's two scripts I made. One's going to run it, and then I'm going to take some commands. There's commands in this, and it's going to pipe it into the script I made. And what this does is it takes some executables and some code that I want to execute, converts it via the MIME method, basically the same way that you upload binaries to Yahoo, sends it over to the web server, and reassembles it. So there we go, my script's done. And as you can see, I popped up some tools over there. All done via one port. So now I'm going to call up that script. And we've made ourselves basically a little upload tool. I don't want to do all this stuff by hand, so we made ourselves a little GUI, This is the Cadillac of hacking, ladies and gentlemen. Let's see what we want. All right, so this is going to take all these tools and, again, convert all this stuff via the MIME method and transport it over there. When it's done executing, you'll see down at the bottom, it'll tell you if it's been successful or not. One of the files is really big because I left the debugging information in it. Go ahead.
Under Apache, the usual limit for URL is 8,192 bytes. Does IIS have similar?
It kind of depends on whether you use, a post or a get method. But I don't actually know what the limits are now. Oh, excellent. Do you know what that is? Okay. Do you have anything else to say? You in the back. Okay, so you can see down here at the bottom, I sent myself over some tools, and you can see them appear over here. So let's try this. And we are the server's iUser guy, not very powerful. We'll prove that assumption by you can see we got a failed to open the security key. Our access was denied. We don't have sufficient permissions to do that. So now we need some way to escalate our privileges. So I uploaded another tool, which is simply there for the purpose of escalating our privileges. See over here in the server administrator group, we just have administrator. All is good, all is as it should be. So now we're going to run this command, and what this command does is that the IDQ DLL is one of the system DLLs that's loaded into the IAS process address space and executes as system. However, the difference is that they didn't check for specific or explicit path. So I'm able to, in this case, I'm actually able to insert a Trojan, and it's going to, when it goes to execute this command, it's going to run my Trojan at system level instead of the one that it should be executing, which is idq.dll, which is in the system 32 directory. So we're going to run that for a second, and we got an error. Let's go over here. Voila. Take your pick. I stuck them both in there. Okay, so that got us one part of the process. We now have a user in the administrators group, so we have some power. But if anyone's very familiar with some of the process, now I actually have to, just because I have them, usually once I've got privilege, I would actually have to log back out and get my ACL back. So I had to put in some extra code to get that to happen so that it would actually execute without having to log back in. So now if we do pwdump.exe, no. Okay, that was supposed to work. No. Okay, well, I'll have to proceed on. Show you the next trick. Just assume that it worked. Did anyone see the last blackout we did? All right, well, it worked then. Running live demos is always a challenge. Okay. What do I want to do next? All right, one thing we can do is enter commands via the URL method, and that all works fine. But when you're trying to do stuff, it gets a little bit laborious. So our next step that we want to do is automate that process a little bit. So we're going to make ourselves a little remote command execution tool. And now we can just run stuff directly. That might be a bad one. Let's, So there, that just makes it a little bit more convenient. It's almost like it's a remote HTTP command shell prompt. Okay, come on, applause. You can't go to sleep out there. All right. If my little privilege escalation tool would have worked, the next thing would be for me to do to like install a sniffer or something. One of the really cool tricks we used was installing a sniffer, collecting the data. If you just pop in the command prompt and redirect all of your sniffer to like a .txt or .html page in your directory, you can just pipe all of your sniffer output right back to you via the HTTP page. We were at one client site one time, and it was one of those rare times when the senior manager guy is there, and when he saw that, the look on his face was just worth everything. All right, so where are we at here? So here's what we did. We just went in through one hole, used entirely web-based protocol. We just basically took all of our, go ahead. You could probably do that. There's a couple different ways to do it. I'm just showing our particular technique. Slight differences, but it essentially comes down to the same thing. So anyway, we saw that just basically by taking all of our traditional tools, converting them to MIME, uploading them, we can get everything to go through one hole and do all of the same things that we were able to do before. However, I do believe this is more powerful than before because we just via one method, we have so many things that we can attack and get root on. We basically got 3 levels, and via one hole, we can attack all 3 levels. That wasn't really possible with a lot of the exploits that came out before. So our entry point can be achieved in a couple ways, via known vulnerability. Didn't we do this slide already? We did. Okay, well, we saw a remote web-based command prompt, HTML form, doing command shells via the server. We got some pretty good interactivity. Here's a couple further ways that you could extend your attack. Pilfering the database for credentials from source disclosure has been pretty useful, especially for people who really go into the whole Java defense thing. There's been quite a few, at least like 9-10 months ago, there was a whole slew of Java source code disclosures on Unix. I'm showing you a Windows NT version. Sama usually goes in and shows an identical Apache JSP exploit of the exact same thing. So it's not really platform dependent. And essentially, it's as simple as that. I think there's 3. Like if you go to securityfocus.com, or I think there's like xfocus.org is one. There's several places where you can get IAS5 privilege escalation tools. So it's very simple to get. Once you have that, you have your web-based command prompt and you're set. Driving through to the back end then becomes, really very simple. Every single one of these activities, we can pipe all of this info straight back out through an HTTP page. So we're not stopped by the firewall or the hole or the lockdown. Again, this is just a small write-up on running a remote sniffer and grabbing all the output via HTTP. Really, the problems are they're very simple problems, but really the main task ahead of us is just the sheer number of things that we have to watch. I mean, the amount of points of contact that we have now that we have to defend against is, more than quadrupled in the past year, or probably building up in the past 2 years. A good side of this is Futility.com. I feel for those guys. If you go to their site and log on to any one of their e-commerce servers and access your account, one time you'll log on, you'll get 50Fidelity.com or 60Fidelity.com, up to I think there's the 349 e-commerce servers. So if you take all those points of access and times it by 349, those guys have a huge job ahead of them. So for each one of those, you have to defend against URL parsing, file canonicalization, and then, of course, you have to trust Microsoft. So we'll see if Bill lives up to his word and his new security mandate. Untested code in web applications is probably your biggest threat because, how many people here are administrators? Okay, not too many. How many people do AP testing? You don't do AP testing. All right, just one. All right. If you take the case of a typical administrator, what he has control over is usually the firewall and the basic security settings of the network. He really does not have control over the application. Other than that, he has to take it from either buy it from a third party or take it from a internal developer and put it on there. And what's he going to do? Lock it down? But anything that he can do to lock it down is just not going to be effective. No company has the time or the resources to be able to, audit their own code. So there's a huge hole there, and I don't see anytime soon that it's really going to get fixed. I would say at least 50% of web applications, I'm just pulling that number out of the air, so, but it seems to me at least 50% of the web applications out there are internal homegrown applications by companies who have their, their web teams. They build these CGI applications and they put them out there. And they're very good. That's an essential part of all of us making money. To me, security is a pain in the ass. I'm just here to make money. That's all I care about. Security is just something that we have to do to ensure that we can try to keep our money. But it's always a balance. I hear a lot of people really complaining, and I'm hoping that our industry is not in danger of becoming the bitter postal industry. But I know a lot of people are really frustrated by kind of their inability to do their job. But security is just, it's not first. The first thing is making money. Everyone, needs to make money first. So all of these applications that we build to get out there, that's the primary goal. So we're always one step behind. I don't have a solution to that, and hopefully just, saying it increases the awareness and somehow that's helpful. One of Samuel's big points is just, zero knowledge administration breeds zero knowledge administrators. My partner is avidly opposed to Microsoft's, zero knowledge campaign. I have a slightly different opinion to it, but he does have a valid point in that, zero knowledge breeds zero knowledge to be able to defend stuff. If you get everything and it's a point-and-click GUI and you set it up and you're ready to go, you're going to have no understanding of some of the problems you might be getting yourself into. But again, the advantage is that zero knowledge empowers people to make money, which is a good thing. So probably the main point here is just top management. A lot of people know this, but hopefully as we achieve this and as we approach it, really it's top management that has to take responsibility. Until people actually get fired for their shoddy work, things really aren't going to change. Personally, what I'm really hoping to see, did anyone here go see Jennifer Granick's talk? Okay. I would really like to see, well, let me back up for a second. She talked about, the licensing issues and how the licensing issues, really protect the vendors, but they don't do anything to protect us. When you bought Firestone tires, you didn't buy any such thing. The first person that is able to successfully sue Microsoft for several $1 million because their hospital got shut down because of their worm I think is going to have a tremendous impact on our industry, and I'm actually really hoping for that. I want to see a software license that says I'm protected. I want to see a software license that says I stand behind this product and I'll give you your money back if it fails. You know, I really would like someone to explain to me the difference between, you know, my web application and a Firestone tire. But our current legal system, you know, treats those differently. I have recourse against a shoddy product of, you know, Firestone tires, but I do not have any legal recourse against the software that I buy. So until that changes, I don't think we're going to have much power to be able to do anything about our current dilemma. So there you go. Thank you all very much. And if you have any questions, I'll answer them.